The bitter wind of late December 1776 cut through the tattered Continental Army like a blade through worn cloth. General George Washington stood at the edge of the Delaware River, his weathered face etched with the weight of a revolution teetering on collapse. Behind him, fewer than 3,000 men huddled around dying campfires, their breath forming ghostly clouds in the Pennsylvania darkness. The very existence of American independence hung by the thinnest of threads. Washington's army had suffered a catastrophic series of defeats throughout the autumn months. The British forces under General William Howe had systematically dismantled American resistance, driving the Continental Army from New York through New Jersey in what many called the retreat to end all retreats. Morale had plummeted to depths previously unimaginable, and desertion rates soared as soldiers abandoned what seemed a hopeless cause. The situation grew more desperate with each passing hour. British and Hessian forces controlled most of New Jersey, establishing winter quarters in key towns including Trenton and Princeton. These professional European soldiers, led by experienced commanders like Colonel Johann Raoul in Trenton and Lieutenant Colonel Charles Mulhood in Princeton, represented the finest military machine of their age. Their confidence bordered on arrogance as they settled into comfortable winter billets, certain that the rebel cause would collapse before spring's arrival, as referenced in David Hackett Fisher's acclaimed historical work Washington's Crossing. The psychological impact of these defeats extended far beyond military considerations. The Continental Congress had fled Philadelphia, and many prominent Americans began reconsidering their support for independence. Wealthy merchants and landowners, previously stalwart supporters of the Revolution, quietly began making overtures to British authorities, seeking pardons and protection for their families and property. Yet Washington possessed something his enemies underestimated: an unshakable determination that transformed desperate circumstances into strategic opportunity. On Christmas night, 1776, he gathered his remaining officers in a cramped farmhouse near Spookonke's Ferry. The flickering candlelight illuminated faces marked by months of hardship also revealed an unexpected glimmer of hope in their commander's eyes. The general's plan seemed born of madness rather than military wisdom. He proposed crossing the ice-choked Delaware River during one of the winter's worst storms to launch surprise attacks on enemy positions. The first target would be Trenton, where Colonel Rawle's Hessian garrison had grown complacent after weeks of unopposed occupation. Success there might provide the momentum needed for an even bolder stroke: an assault on Princeton, where British regulars maintained a crucial supply depot and communications hub. His officers exchanged uncertain glances as Washington outlined the audacious scheme. The risks appeared overwhelming: river crossings in brutal weather, night marches across unfamiliar terrain, coordinated attacks against professional soldiers in fortified positions. A single miscalculation could result in the complete annihilation of the Continental Army and the effective end of American resistance. But Washington understood what his critics did not: desperate times demanded desperate measures. The psychological impact of continued defeats had brought the Revolution to its breaking point. Only a dramatic victory could restore American morale and convince wavering allies that independence remained achievable. The surprise attack at Princeton, following closely after the anticipated success at Trenton, could fundamentally alter the war's trajectory and breathe new life into the dying cause of liberty. The night of December 25th, 1776, transformed from holiday celebration into a symphony of controlled chaos along the Delaware's frozen banks. Washington's men prepared for what many believed would be their final march, either toward glorious victory or honorable death. The river crossing began at sunset, with Colonel John Glover's Marblehead. Mariners manning the boats through increasingly treacherous conditions. Ice chunks the size of wagon wheels crashed against the ferry boats as Continental soldiers struggled to maintain their footing on slippery decks. Many men lacked proper winter clothing, leaving bloody footprints in the snow as they marched toward their embarkation points. The temperature plummeted throughout the evening, turning the driving rain into a mixture of sleet and snow that made visibility nearly impossible. Washington himself crossed early in the operation, Standing tall in the lead boat as Emanuel Leutz would later immortalize in his famous painting,
However,
the reality proved far grimmer than artistic representation suggested. Men cursed and prayed in equal measure as they fought against the elements, their muskets and powder in constant danger of becoming waterlogged and useless. Several soldiers fell into the icy water and required immediate rescue to prevent death from exposure. The crossing continued through the night, with the last boats reaching the New Jersey shore just before dawn on December 26th. Washington had originally planned a coordinated three-pronged attack, but communication failures and weather delays meant his force would advance alone against Trenton. The general made a crucial decision that demonstrated his growing tactical sophistication rather than retreat in the face of these setbacks. He would adapt his strategy to circumstances. The march to Trenton tested every man's endurance as the Continental Army moved through unfamiliar terrain in deteriorating weather conditions. Washington divided his force into two columns, with General Nathaniel Greene commanding the right wing and General John Sullivan leading the left. The plan called for simultaneous attacks from multiple directions to maximize confusion among the Hessian defenders and prevent organized resistance. As dawn approached, advance scouts reported that Trenton appeared quiet, with no unusual enemy activity visible from their observation points. Colonel Rahl's Hessians had indeed grown complacent. During their weeks of comfortable occupation, confident that no enemy force would dare attack during such severe weather conditions, their Christmas celebrations had extended well into the night, leaving many soldiers suffering from the effects of excessive drinking. The attack on Trenton began precisely at 8 o'clock on the morning of December 26th, with American artillery under Captain Alexander Hamilton and Captain Thomas Forrest opening fire from commanding positions at the town's northern edge. The Hessians, caught completely by surprise, struggled to organize effective resistance as Continental infantry poured into the streets from multiple directions. Within 90 minutes, the Battle of Trenton had ended in complete American victory. Colonel Rahl lay mortally wounded, and nearly 1,000 Hessian soldiers found themselves prisoners of war. More importantly, the Continental Army had captured desperately needed supplies, artillery pieces, and small arms that would prove crucial in the coming campaign. The psychological impact proved even more significant than the material gains. News of the victory spread rapidly throughout the colonies, electrifying a population that had grown resigned to defeat and occupation. Recruiting offices that had stood empty for weeks suddenly found themselves overwhelmed with new volunteers eager to serve under Washington's command. The general who had led his army across the Delaware in darkness emerged into daylight as a national hero whose reputation would never again face serious challenge. But Washington understood that one victory, however dramatic, could not reverse months of setbacks and restore American independence. The enemy would respond quickly and decisively to this unexpected defeat, likely concentrating overwhelming force to crush the Continental Army before it could exploit its temporary advantage. The time had come to plan an even bolder stroke that would cement American gains and establish momentum for the campaigns ahead. General Charles Cornwallis received word of the Trenton disaster while enjoying New Year's festivities in New York City. The British commander's initial disbelief quickly transformed into cold fury as additional reports confirmed the scope of Hessian losses and American gains. Within hours, it assembled a formidable force of 8,000 seasoned troops and begun a rapid march toward Princeton. Determined to trap Washington's army before it could escape back across the Delaware, Cornwallis's confidence seemed well-founded as his columns approached the Princeton area on January 2nd, 1770. Intelligence reports suggested that Washington commanded fewer than 5,000 men, many of them short-term militia whose enlistments would expire at midnight on December 31st. The British general believed he faced a desperate enemy, with limited options and no realistic hope of avoiding decisive battle on terms favorable to Crown forces. Washington, however, had spent the days following Trenton's capture, carefully analyzing his strategic situation and preparing for the inevitable British response. He understood that Cornwallis possessed superior numbers and equipment, But he also recognized that his recent victory had fundamentally altered the psychological dynamics of the conflict. American morale had soared while enemy confidence had suffered its first serious blow since the war's beginning. The Continental Army established defensive positions south of Trenton along Assunpink Creek, presenting Cornwallis with what appeared to be a conventional battle line. British advance units probed these positions throughout January 2nd, encountering fierce resistance that suggested Washington intended to make his stand on ground of his own choosing. Artillery exchanges continued sporadically as both armies prepared for what seemed an inevitable confrontation at dawn. But Washington had no intention of fighting the battle his enemy expected. As darkness fell on January 2nd, he implemented one of the war's most audacious deceptions, leaving skeleton forces to maintain campfires and create the impression of normal military activity while the main army began a secret night march toward Princeton. The plan required precise timing and absolute coordination to succeed without detection. The route Washington selected avoided main roads where British patrols might discover the movement, instead following obscure farm paths and hunters' trails that would bring his army to Princeton's outskirts by dawn. Local guides familiar with the terrain proved invaluable in navigating through the darkness, while advance scouts ensured that no enemy forces blocked their approach to the target, as referenced in Thomas Fleming's comprehensive study, The Strategy of Victory. Washington's decision to attack Princeton rather than attempt another river crossing demonstrated his evolution from defensive-minded commander to aggressive, strategic thinker. The general had learned to exploit enemy assumptions and use their strengths against them, turning Cornwallis's superior numbers into a liability by forcing him to defend multiple positions simultaneously. The night march proceeded with remarkable discipline despite challenging conditions that included bitter cold, muddy roads, and constant danger of discovery. Washington rode among his men, offering quiet encouragement and ensuring that stragglers received assistance to maintain the column's integrity. Officers whispered orders rather than shouting commands, and wagon wheels were wrapped in cloth to muffle their sound. By 4 o'clock on the morning of January 3rd, the Continental Army had reached positions within striking distance of Princeton. Without alerting British defenders to their presence, Washington divided his force into 3 assault columns, with General Hugh Mercer commanding the right wing, General John Cadwalader leading the center, and General Sullivan directing the left. Each commander received detailed instructions regarding his specific objectives and the timing of coordinated attacks. The trap was set, and British forces in Princeton remained completely unaware of their peril. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Mohud commanded approximately 1,200 men divided between the town itself and nearby outposts. Confident that Washington's army remained pinned against Assunpink Creek by Cornwallis's superior force, dawn would bring a rude awakening that would forever change the course of American independence and establish Princeton's place in the pantheon of decisive military engagements. The first gray light of January 3rd, 1777, revealed frost-covered fields surrounding Princeton as the Continental Army moved into final attack positions. Washington had positioned his men with meticulous care, ensuring that each assault column could strike simultaneously while maintaining communication with the others. The element of surprise remained absolute, with British sentries showing no awareness of the approaching danger. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Mohud had risen early to prepare for his planned march to join Cornwallis at Trenton, believing that concentrated British forces would easily crush Washington's trapped army. His confidence reflected months of successful occupation and the natural arrogance of professional soldiers, facing what they considered amateur opponents. The irony of this miscalculation would become apparent within the hour. At approximately 8 o'clock, General Hugh Mercer's column encountered British forces under Captain Thomas Scott near the William Clark Farm, about a mile southwest of Princeton. This meeting engagement, though unplanned, proved crucial to the battle's outcome as both sides scrambled to deploy their troops effectively. Mercer, a Scottish physician turned soldier, had served with distinction throughout the war and commanded some of Washington's most reliable troops. The initial exchange of musket fire quickly escalated into a fierce firefight as both commanders committed additional forces to what they recognized as the battle's decisive action. Scotsmen, though surprised by the American presence, maintained their discipline and began forming the traditional British line of battle that had proven effective in countless European conflicts. However, they soon discovered that American tactics had evolved considerably since the war's early stages. Mercer's troops utilized available cover with skill that impressed even their enemies, moving between trees and stone walls to deliver accurate fire while minimizing their exposure to British volleys. This adaptation of European linear tactics to American terrain conditions represented a significant development in Continental Army capabilities. Reflecting months of hard-earned battlefield experience under Washington's demanding leadership, the engagement took a tragic turn when British reinforcements arrived and began pushing Mercer's men back across the frozen fields. The American general, attempting to rally his troops for a counterattack, suffered multiple bayonet wounds that would prove mortal. His fall seemed to signal American defeat as Continental forces began retreating in disorder toward their original positions. At this critical moment, Washington himself appeared on the battlefield, riding directly between the opposing lines in a display of personal courage that would become legendary. The general's presence immediately steadied American resolve, as soldiers who had begun to flee turned back to support their commander. His calm demeanor under fire inspired confidence that transformed potential defeat into renewed determination. Captain Alexander Hamilton's artillery battery wheeled into action, delivering devastating fire against British formations at close range. The young officer's guns, positioned to enfilade enemy lines, created chaos among troops accustomed to facing opponents who followed conventional European tactical doctrine. American artillery had improved dramatically since the war's beginning, and Princeton marked its coming of age as an effective battlefield weapon. The tide of battle began turning as additional Continental units arrived and extended the American line. Washington coordinated these reinforcements with the skill of a veteran commander, positioning each unit to maximum advantage while maintaining pressure on increasingly desperate British defenders. The general, who had crossed the Delaware in desperation, now demonstrated the tactical brilliance that would carry him through years of challenging campaigns. Lieutenant Colonel Mohood found his position becoming increasingly untenable as American forces threatened to envelop his flanks. The British commander, though brave and competent, lacked sufficient manpower to maintain extended defensive lines against Washington's coordinated assault. His men had fought well, but numbers and tactical innovation were beginning to tell against traditional military methods. As the morning progressed, it became clear that Princeton would fall to American arms. The psychological impact of this second consecutive victory would prove even more significant than the material gains, demonstrating to allies and enemies alike that Washington's success at Trenton had not been merely fortunate accident, but evidence of genuine military capability. By 10 o'clock on the morning of January 3rd, the Battle of Princeton had reached its climax as British resistance began crumbling under relentless American pressure. Lieutenant Colonel Mohood, recognizing that his position had become hopeless, ordered a fighting withdrawal toward New Brunswick, where Lord Cornwallis maintained substantial reserves. The retreat quickly degenerated into a rout as Continental forces pressed their advantage with unprecedented coordination and determination. Washington's tactical masterstroke came when he ordered Captain Hamilton's artillery to advance boldly into the town center, where the guns could dominate Princeton's Main Street and prevent organized British resistance. The young artillery commander, displaying remarkable courage under fire, positioned his battery within point-blank range of enemy positions and began systematic destruction of defensive strongpoints. His accurate fire forced British troops to abandon prepared positions and retreat in increasing disorder. The Continental infantry followed closely behind the advancing guns, with General Sullivan's column entering Princeton from the southwest, while General Cadwalader's men swept in from the northwest. This coordinated assault left British defenders with no viable defensive line and forced them to choose between surrender and precipitous flight. Most chose flight, abandoning valuable supplies and equipment in their haste to escape encirclement. American casualties had been surprisingly light considering the intensity of the fighting, with fewer than 40 men killed or wounded compared. 2 British losses, exceeding 100, killed, wounded, or captured. More importantly, the Continental Army had seized crucial supplies, including blankets, shoes, and provisions that would sustain the troops through the remainder of winter. These material gains, while significant, paled beside the psychological impact of consecutive victories. The capture of Princeton marked a turning point, not only in military terms, but in the broader struggle for American independence. News of Washington's second dramatic triumph spread throughout the colonies faster than official dispatches, carried by merchants, travelers, and ordinary citizens who understood they were witnessing history. The general, who had been dismissed as incompetent just weeks earlier, now stood revealed as a master of strategic deception and tactical innovation. British confidence, meanwhile, suffered its most serious blow since the war's beginning. Lord Cornwallis, arriving at Princeton hours after the battle's conclusion, found only smoldering buildings and abandoned equipment where he had expected to trap and destroy Washington's army. The British commander's frustration was evident as he surveyed the scene of yet another humiliating defeat at American hands. As referenced in John Buchanan's authoritative work, The Road to Valley Forge, the Princeton victory demonstrated Washington's evolution from defensive-minded commander to aggressive strategist capable of seizing initiative and maintaining momentum. The general had learned to exploit enemy weaknesses while maximizing his own army's strengths, transforming Continental forces from a collection of amateur soldiers into an effective fighting machine. The immediate aftermath of Princeton saw a dramatic shift in public opinion throughout the colonies. Recruiting stations that had struggled to attract volunteers suddenly found themselves overwhelmed with men eager to serve under Washington's command. State governments that had been reluctant to provide support now competed to demonstrate their commitment to the cause of independence. European observers also took notice of these unexpected American successes. French military advisors who had been skeptical of Continental Army capabilities began reporting to their government that Washington possessed genuine strategic talent and that American forces might prove more formidable than previously believed. These reports would prove crucial in securing formal French alliance within the year. Washington understood that his twin victories at Trenton and Princeton, while dramatic, represented only the beginning of a long struggle that would test American resolve in ways yet unimagined. The British Empire possessed vast resources and would inevitably respond to these setbacks with overwhelming force designed to crush colonial resistance once and for all. The Continental Army would need to continue evolving if it hoped to survive. The challenge is ahead. But for now, on this cold January morning in 1777, American independence had gained precious breathing space and renewed hope. The surprise attack at Princeton had indeed changed the war, transforming what seemed inevitable defeat into the foundation for ultimate victory. Washington's gamble had succeeded beyond his boldest dreams, establishing him as a commander worthy to lead a nation toward its destiny. The week following Princeton witnessed a transformation in American fortunes that few could have imagined possible during the dark days of December 1776. Washington established winter quarters in Morristown, New Jersey, choosing high ground that provided excellent defensive positions while keeping British forces off balance regarding Continental Army intentions. The psychological impact of consecutive victories continued reverberating throughout the colonies and across the Atlantic. Lord Cornwallis found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position as reports of American success reached London and prompted sharp questions about British military competence. The general who had confidently predicted Washington's destruction now faced the embarrassment of explaining how a supposedly amateur army had outmaneuvered and defeated professional European troops in consecutive engagements his superiors. Patience with colonial military operations began wearing thin. British strategy underwent fundamental revision as commanders recognized they could no longer dismiss American military capabilities or assume that overwhelming force alone would guarantee victory. The Continental Army had demonstrated tactical sophistication and strategic flexibility that demanded serious respect from professional soldiers, who had initially viewed colonial resistance as temporary inconvenience rather than genuine military threat, Washington utilized his newfound reputation to address persistent problems that had plagued the Continental Army since its formation. Recruitment increased dramatically as young men throughout the colonies sought to serve under a commander whose name had become synonymous with victory against impossible odds. State governments, previously reluctant to provide adequate support, now competed to demonstrate their commitment to the revolutionary cause. The general also began implementing organizational reforms designed to transform his army from a collection of independent units into a cohesive fighting force capable of sustained operations against the world's most powerful military machine. Professional drill, standardized equipment, and improved logistics became priorities as Washington prepared for the challenges that would inevitably come with spring campaigning. French interest in American affairs intensified significantly following news of Princeton and Trenton. King Louis XVI government had been monitoring colonial resistance with growing interest. Seeing an opportunity to weaken their British rivals without direct military involvement, Washington's victories provided evidence that American forces might prove worthy allies in a broader struggle against British dominance. The Marquis de Lafayette, a young French nobleman seeking military glory, made his decision to join Washington's cause directly as a result of Princeton's impact on European perceptions of American capabilities. His arrival in America would bring not only his personal talents, but connections to French military and political circles that would prove crucial in securing formal alliance and material support. British public opinion also began shifting as news of repeated defeats reached London through official dispatches and private correspondence. Parliamentary critics of Lord North's government found new ammunition for their arguments against continuing expensive military operations that seemed to produce nothing but embarrassing failures and mounting casualties without achieving decisive results. The Continental Congress, which had fled Philadelphia in panic just weeks earlier, now returned with renewed confidence in their cause and their commanding general. Washington's stock had risen so dramatically that few members dared question his strategic decisions or demand detailed explanations of his plans. The general had earned political as well as military credibility through his battlefield successes. Local populations throughout New Jersey began providing intelligence and material support to Continental forces with enthusiasm that had been notably absent during the autumn retreat. Washington's victories had demonstrated that British occupation was neither permanent nor inevitable. Encouraging civilians to risk cooperation with American forces, despite the obvious dangers involved. The winter of 1776 to 1777 thus became a period of consolidation and preparation rather than mere survival. Washington used the respite provided by his victories to rebuild his army's capabilities while maintaining pressure on British forces through aggressive patrolling and raids that kept enemy commanders uncertain about American intentions and capabilities. As referenced in David Hackett Fisher's masterful analysis, the Princeton campaign represented Washington's emergence as a strategic thinker capable of complex operations requiring precise coordination and timing. The general had evolved from reactive defender to proactive commander, who could seize initiative and maintain momentum. Despite operating with inferior resources against professional opponents, the surprise attack at Princeton had indeed changed the war's trajectory, but its ultimate significance lay not in tactical success, but in demonstrating that American independence remained achievable despite overwhelming odds. Washington had proven that courage, intelligence, and determination could overcome numerical disadvantage and professional training when properly applied to favorable circumstances. As winter deepened into 1777, the full magnitude of Princeton's impact became clear to observers on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. What had begun as a desperate gamble by a defeated army had evolved into the foundation for American independence and the emergence of George Washington as one of history's great military commanders. The battle's consequences would continue rippling through the decades and centuries that followed. The immediate military results proved significant, enough to alter the war's strategic balance fundamentally. British forces, previously confident in their ability to crush colonial resistance through conventional means, now faced an enemy that had demonstrated tactical sophistication and strategic flexibility beyond their expectations. The Continental Army's transformation from amateur militia to professional fighting force accelerated dramatically following Princeton's success. Washington's reputation, both domestic and international, underwent a complete metamorphosis that would define his future role in American history. The general, who had led his army across the Delaware in darkness, emerged as a figure of international stature, whose military genius commanded respect from allies and enemies alike. European military observers began studying his campaigns as examples of innovative strategic thinking adapted to New World conditions. The psychological impact on American public opinion proved even more significant than immediate military gains. Princeton demonstrated that independence remained achievable despite overwhelming British advantages in manpower, equipment, and professional military experience. Colonial resistance, which had seemed destined for collapse just weeks earlier, now possessed renewed vigor and determination that would sustain the struggle through years of additional hardship. French involvement in the American Revolution accelerated directly as a result of Princeton's demonstration of Continental Army capabilities. King Louis XVI's government, previously hesitant to commit resources to what seemed a hopeless colonial rebellion, now saw genuine opportunity to weaken British power through support of credible American military forces. Formal French alliance, signed in February 1778, traced its origins to the confidence Princeton generated in American military potential. British strategy underwent fundamental revision as commanders recognized that traditional European military methods required adaptation to American conditions and Continental Army capabilities. The assumption that overwhelming force would quickly crush colonial resistance gave way to recognition that the conflict would require sustained effort and innovative approaches to achieve decisive results. The battle's impact extended beyond immediate military and political consequences to influence the broader development of American military tradition. Princeton established precedents for innovative tactics, aggressive leadership, and strategic flexibility that would characterize American military operations in future conflicts. Washington's willingness to risk everything on audacious attacks became a defining characteristic of American military culture. Professional military education began incorporating Princeton as a case study in effective use of surprise, deception, and coordinated operations under challenging conditions. The battle demonstrated how superior leadership and tactical innovation could overcome numerical disadvantage and equipment shortfalls. When properly executed by disciplined troops fighting for a cause they believed in, the transformation of George Washington from Virginia planter to international military figure began with his crossing of the Delaware and culminated in his Princeton victory. The general, who had struggled with defeats throughout 1776, emerged as a commander whose strategic vision and tactical brilliance would guide American forces through the remainder of the Revolutionary War and establish the foundation for his later role as the nation's first president, as referenced in Ron Chernow's comprehensive biography. Washington's Princeton campaign marked his emergence as a truly great military leader whose influence extended far beyond immediate battlefield. Success. The general had demonstrated that American independence was not merely possible, but probable when led by commanders capable of matching European military professionals in strategic thinking and tactical execution. The surprise attack at Princeton, on that frozen January morning in 1777, changed not only the immediate course of military operations, but the entire trajectory of American history. Washington's victory demonstrated that a new nation could indeed emerge from colonial status to take its place among the world's independent powers through courage, determination, and innovative military leadership. The legacy of Princeton continues, echoing through American military tradition, reminding each generation that desperate circumstances can be transformed into triumph through bold leadership and unwavering commitment to the cause of freedom. Washington's crossing of the Delaware and victory at Princeton established the foundation for American independence and created the template for military leadership that continues inspiring soldiers and citizens more than 2 centuries later. This historic account draws upon extensive primary sources and scholarly research too. present an authentic narrative of one of the American Revolution's most decisive engagements. The Battle of Princeton stands as testament to the power of strategic vision, tactical innovation, and courageous leadership in transforming the course of human history.